So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter. Then the cities laid waste for many centuries. Those are the cities of the Messiah, where he said then, prior of his ascension, go therefore around the world and form holy tabernacles, holy cities, and then tabernacling. So then, as far as the great prophet Daniel, the statesperson, a politician, he gave many understandings of timing as far as the number of times and so on and so forth. There is a way of making this calculation easier, making a reversal from the time of the end of the age. So then we find ourselves during the time of Metchiahu, 24th chapter, when he spent, the Messiah, 2 days with the Samaritans. Obviously he was then transfiguring himself on Mount Gerizim, because he had to come out of Jerusalem as the living tabernacle. Then he went to Samaria, indicating then salvation of the Gentiles. Makes sense. So then, when you understand the Messiah spent then 2 days, 2 Yom days, with the Samaritans, indicating Gentile level for 2,000 years. When did he spend time with the Samaritans? Roughly 5031, 5032. He was born in 4999 per the Quirinius calendar. So then when we make this calculation, 5031, 5032, 2 Yom days at 1,000 each, places then 7031, 7032. From this timing then, if we reverse and if we make the calculations properly, then we can understand at least roughly these times and seasons. However, we understand the year that starts with then the barley aviv. It's not the same every year. It's understandable. But then roughly we can understand then the times and the seasons, and then we can make a matching of whatsoever calculation from the time of Daniel. So from the time of Daniel, then roughly 500 years prior of the birth of the Messiah, then comes the birth of the Messiah, then comes the eclipses of his birth. Then they understand the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, Tishri, mid-Tishri. Then the Messiah tabernacled with his people. So from this time then we understand later he was born as king. So his kingship of 1,000 years started. So then calculations can be done in a reversed understanding, however they must match, making a whole lot easier. Then people can study, and at least they can position themselves roughly from the reverse, from 5031, 5032, 2,000 years later, places then in 7031, 7032. If we understand then times and seasons, then you understand then roughly those times and seasons. However, the best is from the time of Daniel and onwards. However, we do have the calculation of the time of the end, so they have to match. And since the Messiah's birth, then 4999, he was placed on a pole 5032. Then he spent time with Samaritans prior of his going to the pole, because he came down from the mountain as the worthy lamb, as we read then in the 5th chapter of Galah. So when you read the 5th chapter, you understand then what it means. The breaking of the seals. The breaking of the seals then was done on the top of Mount Gerizim. The Messiah had to come out of Jerusalem as the living instructions, and he tabernacled outside. It was the time of the Gentiles. The Messiah was not going to stay over there in Jerusalem. He had to come out of Jerusalem, indicating then time of Gentile salvation. Mount Gerizim means prostration. They prostrated before the mountain because the Creator very wisely had to have His Son come out of Jerusalem and starting then Holy Tabernacling of the second tabernacle services. So when you read the 5th chapter of Galah or Revelation, you are reading Spring Feast. The only section related with the Autumn Feast of Revelation is then sounding of the shofars. But then people have scoundrelized the Scripture. People have copies of the Scripture where then translators did not know what they were doing. Then they came up with a column of salt, the wife of Lot, what was going on. It was the salt rations paid during the time of the Roman legions when they used to get then the tribute paid with the salt rations. Column of salt. Where did you get column of salt? Are you some sort of a mystical world outside of the planet? During the time of the atomic bombs in 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they found piles of salt around the blast area. You know what those were? The mineral salts of the body burned. A memorial of salt. She came out of the city with Lot, then she decided to return. Thus she returned, she became salt. She was burned. But then people, sometimes they are kind of a mystical, you know. Oh, she could not observe it back because it would become a column of salt. So then the Messiah, he is then on Mount Gerizim. Why he was then on Mount Gerizim? What was the objective of the Messiah? Coming out of Jerusalem, indicating was time of salvation of the Gentiles. The training of the set apart was done. Time of then transition, and then the first holy city was Yohanan's. That's why you get Hebrews. Hebrews was then given by the Messiah to whom? Yohanan. Why was Yohanan? Because he was in the first holy city of the transitional time after he was in the first holy city, and then the Messiah, what did he do? He dictated tabernacling service of the second tabernacle services, his services. What was the objective of those writings? To straighten out those 7 cities in Asia Minor. Those cities were in sin. Yohanan received those understandings. It was delivered to those 7 cities. They were straightened out. So then when we understand what the Messiah did, spending time with the Samaritans, 2 Yom days from 5031, 5032, and then 2,000 years later, if you reverse it, you are able then to match from the time of Daniel and reversed from the time of the end. Those have to match. If your calculation is true, from the time of Daniel has to match 7031, 7032. And then Daniel the statesperson said, many times regarding then, and at the end, people would go to and fro. What is the indication of to and fro? 1,000 years of deceit. From 1009 to 2009, 6009, 7009. 1,000 years of Nahashatan. It's gone. We are returned to the truth, where then the holy cities would indicate the plan of salvation and indicating the kingdom to come government. So quite honestly, we are more precise at the moment because the distance from our time, 7012, 12th month, until the end, 7032, let's say maximum, we are far more precise from our time to the end than vice versa. It's a whole lot more calculation and more precision from the time of Daniel to our time than vice versa. From the time of the end and then reversing until Daniel. But both of them must match. Very interesting study, because then we study more of what Daniel then said regarding the time of the end. Nations then, they would come together and try to adhere to each other, but they could not. Speaking of the Eurozone, the Euro is going to break because it was concocted during the time of the seat. As we understand the Chinese system, then when it comes, downloaded in the computer. So far we don't have instant tax deduction from every transaction related with earning. If we don't get our tax system straightened out, we are going to get in real trouble in the next 36 months. So then, much more coming up, because then we can study more profoundly what the Messiah has said regarding tabernacling, regarding the time of the end, regarding then the Messiah straightening out his own people. They had the wrong ideas of tabernacling, and the Messiah was taking them away from building. As we understand, the third temple won't be built. Whatsoever they are doing over there is going to be thrown around. The Messiah said, don't you observe these? The Messiah was saying, it's going to be destroyed. Because the Messiah had his objective. What's going to be in the Temple Mount when the time comes is the simple replica of the desert tabernacle. There won't be a third temple. The sons of Ishmael, they won't let. And then the most important, in the near future, when the Chinese system then is implemented, after these 36 months, then Arabia is going to be making decisions. Because they are the sons of Ishmael, the first son. Then comes the Israelic people. And then the other nations, they have to work. And the time of the city is gone. Time of being, smart and try to outsmart the other people, using deceit, schemes. Those are from the time of deceit. Those times are gone. We are understanding the truth as it was during the time of the Messiah's 1,000 years. But then it's time of restoration, where then we are simply preparing ourselves for the autumn feast. We are during the time of the remnant. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.